Did you know everything you thought about medieval women might be wrong? Have you ever wondered what their daily lives were really like? Number 12. Women were always oppressed housewives. Ever scrolled through your history textbook and seen those images of medieval women hunched over cooking pots or spinning wheels? That's only half the story. While it's true, many women managed households, medieval women weren't always confined to homes with no power or influence. In medieval towns and cities, women worked in a surprising range of professions. They were brewers. In fact, brewing was predominantly a female profession until the commercial revolution changed that. Bakers, silk weavers, milliners, and even blacksmiths in some cases. Guild records from places like London, York, and Paris show women were active members in dozens of craft guilds. Some even ran their own businesses. Take Marjorie Kembe, a 15th century businesswoman who started a brewing enterprise before becoming a famous mystic. Or how about Alice Perrers, who became one of London's wealthiest merchants in the 14th century? These weren't rare exceptions. They represented a reality where women frequently contributed to the medieval economy outside the home. Rural women worked incredibly hard too, not just in houses but in fields, vineyards, and with livestock. When harvest time came around, everyone pitched in, regardless of gender. Medieval illustrations often show women harvesting alongside men, wielding scythes and pitchforks with equal skill. Even within the household, being the lady of the manor was more like being a CEO than a housewife. Noble women managed extensive estates, supervised dozens of servants, oversaw food production and storage, and handled household finances that would be worth millions in today's money. These women weren't sitting around embroidering all day, though they did that too. They were running complex operations that kept medieval society functioning. Number 11. Medieval women couldn't own property. Have you ever heard people say medieval women couldn't own anything? Total nonsense. While medieval property laws varied across Europe and changed throughout the period, many women owned property, businesses, and even managed their own money. In England, after the Norman conquest, a system called dower rights guaranteed widows access to at least 1/3 of their husband's estate for their lifetime. Some regions had even more progressive systems. In parts of Spain and southern France, women maintained rights to their own property even after marriage through systems of separate property ownership. Widowhood often granted medieval women unprecedented economic freedom. Take Philippa Chachale, a 15th century London widow who ran her husband's wool business after his death, expanding it and becoming one of the city's prominent wool merchants. Or consider the countless widow Brewsters who dominated the ale-making trade in English towns. Court records from across Europe show women regularly buying, selling, and inheriting property. They appeared in court to defend their property rights and engaged in legal battles when necessary. Some remarkable women built impressive portfolios. Matilda of Flanders managed vast estates across England and Normandy in the 11th century. Eleanor of Aquitaine controlled more territory in France than the French king himself. For peasant women, property might consist of household goods, tools, livestock, or land use rights, rather than formal land ownership. But these were still valuable assets they controlled. Archaeological finds regularly uncover women buried with keys, powerful symbols of their authority over household goods and storage areas. Even unmarried women sometimes controlled property. In many European cities, single women could operate as femme sole, a legal status that allowed them to trade, enter contracts, and own property independently. Joan of Leeds was a 14th century English craftswoman who owned her own workshop and trained apprentices, all while remaining single. Number 10. All medieval women married young and had countless children. Convinced all medieval women were child brides who spent their lives constantly pregnant. Think again. While royal marriages could happen at young ages for political alliances, ordinary women typically married much later than most people realize. In late medieval England and much of Northern Europe, women generally married in their early to mid-20s. Parish records and tax documents show the average age at first marriage for women was around 22 to 24 in many communities. This pattern, known as the Western European marriage pattern, actually meant women had fewer children than in later centuries. Medieval couples practiced various forms of family planning, from herbal contraceptives to extended misting, which naturally suppresses fertility. The 12th century medical text, Trotula, contains numerous recipes for preventing conception, showing this knowledge was widespread. Some women even had careers as midwives who provided reproductive health services beyond just delivering baby. Not everyone married either. Estimates suggest that in some medieval communities, up to 15% of women never married. Some chose religious life, while others remained single and supported themselves through work. In 15th century Florence tax records show numerous households headed by single women. They weren't all nuns or widows. Many were simply independent women, making their own way. For those who did marry and have children, medieval motherhood looked different than today. Extended families and communal childcare were common, especially in rural villages where women worked in fields or with livestock. Children were often cared for by older siblings, grandparents, or other community members while mothers worked. Upper-class women typically employed wet nurses and servants to help with childcare, allowing them to manage estates and engage in cultural pursuits. Eleanor of Castile, Queen to Edward I of England, had 16 children, but still actively managed her properties and traveled extensively throughout her marriage. Number 9. Medieval women were completely uneducated. Did teachers only exist for boys in medieval times? Absolutely not. While formal university education was indeed restricted to men, assuming medieval women were all illiterate would be utterly wrong. Women's education varied dramatically by social class and time period, but educational opportunities existed throughout the Middle Ages. In noble households, girls often received instruction alongside their brothers until adolescence. They learned reading, writing, basic arithmetic, music, and languages, particularly French and Latin. Nunneries served as important educational centers for women. Many contained impressive libraries and scriptoria, writing rooms, where manuscripts were copied and preserved. Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th century German abbess, wrote extensively on medicine, natural history, and theology. Her work, Physica, demonstrates sophisticated understanding of herbal medicine and natural phenomena. Christine de Pizan, born in 1364, received an exceptional education that enabled her to become Europe's first professional female author. Her book, The City of Ladies, directly challenged misogynistic attitudes prevalent in her time. She supported herself and her children through writing after becoming a widow, evidence of both her education and Atterpelm spirit. Merchant-class women often needed literacy and numeracy skills to help run family businesses. Account books and letters from trading families frequently show women's handwriting alongside men's, particularly when husbands traveled for business. The Paston letters from 15th century England include extensive correspondence from several generations of women, proving their literacy. Even among peasant women, practical education was valued. Girls learned complex skills like brewing, textile production, food preservation, and medicinal herb use. These knowledge systems required sophisticated understanding of natural processes and precise techniques passed down through generations of women. By the late medieval period, evidence suggests female literacy was rising, particularly in urban areas. Wills often mention books owned by women. Prayer books show signs of heavy use by female owners, and women's signatures appear on legal documents with increasing frequency. Number 8. Medieval women had no political power. Ever think medieval women just sat around while men made all the decisions? The reality might surprise you. While they didn't have formal voting rights as we understand them today, medieval women exercised significant political influence through various channels. Queens and noble women wielded substantial authority. Eleanor of Aquitaine served as regent of England during her son Richard's absence on crusade, effectively running the country. Blanche of Castile ruled France as regent for her young son Louis IX and crushed multiple baronial rebellions. These weren't anomalies. Numerous women held regencies across medieval Europe. Even when not serving as regents, royal and noble women shaped politics through diplomacy. They arranged marriages, negotiated treaties, and maintained kinship networks that formed the backbone of medieval politics. Queen Philippa of Hainaut personally intervened to save the lives of the burghers of Calais during the 100 Years' War, demonstrating her political influence. Women also exercised power as abbesses, controlling vast landholdings and communities. Some abbesses held quasi-episcopal powers, including the right to convene synods and manage extensive territories. The Abbess of Fontefraud oversaw an order that included both male and female members, with men subordinate to her authority. In medieval Italian city-states, women of powerful families like the Medici played crucial political roles. Alfonsina Orsini ran Florence's government when her son Lorenzo was exiled. In Venice, Doges' wives participated in civic ceremonies and influenced diplomatic relationships with other states. At local levels, women appeared in town councils and guild meetings. Records from late medieval London show widows speaking at guild assemblies and even voting on certain matters. In some Germanic regions, women participated in village assemblies that governed local affairs. Perhaps most surprisingly, some women literally fought in politics. During the 12th century civil war in England, known as the Anarchy, Matilda fought for her claim to the throne against her cousin Stephen. She commanded armies, held castles, and briefly controlled London before being forced to retreat. The public-private divide we imagine today didn't exist in the same way. A noblewoman's management of household affairs, including relationships with vassals, dispute resolution, and resource allocation, was inherently political in a society built on personal relationships and obligation. Number 7. Medieval women had no legal rights. Think medieval women had no standing in court. The legal records tell a different story. While their legal status differed from men's, medieval women regularly appeared in courts, brought lawsuits, and defended their rights. Court records from across Europe show women as active participants in the legal system. In England, women brought approximately 15% of all civil cases in some local courts. They sued for debt, property disputes, assault, and breach of contract. The court rolls of medieval London contain thousands of cases involving women as both plaintiffs and defendants. While married women in many regions operated under the legal concept of coverture, where their legal identity was covered by their husbands, the practical application was far more flexible than textbooks suggest. Women frequently appeared in court alongside their husbands, or even represented their husbands' interests in their absence. Widows enjoyed particularly strong legal standing. They could sue and be sued, enter contracts, and manage property independently. Many widows successfully defended inheritance rights against male relatives who challenged them. Some became formidable legal opponents, known for their persistent pursuit of justice. Even within marriage, women had legal protections. Courts consistently upheld women's property rights through dower and dowry arrangements. Women could seek legal separation in cases of cruelty or abandonment, and courts occasionally granted them alimony payments. In 1365, Alice de Bideford successfully sued her husband for maintenance after he abandoned her, winning a court order for financial support. Women also served as executors of wills, a role that required legal knowledge and standing. Thousands of medieval wills name women as executors, responsible for distributing assets and settling debts, showing society trusted their legal capabilities. Margaret Paston, whose letters provide invaluable insights into 15th century English life, managed complex legal affairs for her family over decades. In craft guilds, widows often retained full membership rights, allowing them to continue businesses after their husband's death. Guild regulations from cities like London, Paris, and Florence specifically mention women's rights to practice trades and train apprentices. Even peasant women accessed legal systems. Manor court records show they brought cases related to property boundaries, livestock damage, and personal conflicts. They testified as witnesses, swore oaths, and participated in the community-based legal processes that governed daily life. Number 6. Medieval women were constantly accused of witchcraft. Did women in medieval Europe live in constant fear of being accused as witches? Despite what Hollywood suggests, the massive witch hunts most people imagine were actually a Renaissance and early modern phenomenon, not a medieval one. During most of the Middle Ages, church authorities were actually skeptical about witchcraft claims. The influential canon Episcopi, circulated since the 10th century, condemned belief in witches as pagan superstition. When people claimed to fly with Diana or transform into animals, church officials considered these claims delusions, not reality. Major witch hunting manuals like the infamous Malleus Maleficarum, Hammer of Witches, appeared only in the late 15th century, at the very end of the medieval period. The serious witch persecutions we associate with burning women at stakes happened primarily in the 16th and 17th centuries, after the Middle Ages had ended. Medieval courts dealt with magic differently than Renaissance witch hunters would later. Cases involving magic typically focused on specific harmful acts, like poisoning, rather than diabolical pacts or sabbats. And importantly, these cases targeted men almost as frequently as when King Philip IV of France wanted to destroy the Knights Templar in 1307, he accused the entire male order of sorcery and heresy. In medieval Iceland, approximately 90% of those recorded as practicing magic were men. In Anglo-Saxon England, laws against magical practices used gender-neutral language. Even in late medieval trials, substantial numbers of men faced magical accusations. When medieval women did face accusations related to supernatural activities, these often involved healing practices or love magic rather than Satan worship. Many communities had local wise women who provided medicinal remedies, assisted with childbirth, or offered protective charms. These women were usually integrated members of society, not feared outcasts. Ironically, educated elites were more likely to be accused of serious magical crimes than peasant women during the medieval period. When Joan of Navarre, Queen Dowager of England, faced witchcraft accusations in 1419, it was transparently political. Her stepson Henry V wanted to seize her wealth and the charges were dropped after he got her money. The shift toward associating women specifically with harmful witchcraft gained momentum only in the late 1400s, coinciding with the collapse of medieval worldviews and the emergence of new religious tensions that would characterize the Renaissance and Reformation. Number 5. Medieval women had no reproductive rights or bodily autonomy. Shocked to think medieval women might have had any say over their own bodies. The historical evidence reveals a much more complex reality than most people assume. Medieval women possessed considerable knowledge about reproductive health passed down through generations. Medical texts, like the Trotula Compendium, compiled by women healers from Salerno, Italy, contained extensive information about contraception, menstruation, pregnancy, and childbirth. These texts openly discussed methods to prevent conception using herbal preparations, pessaries, and other techniques. Archaeological discoveries have unearthed numerous amulets and charms intended to protect women during pregnancy and childbirth, showing how women actively sought control over these dangerous life events. Birthing chambers were primarily female spaces where women made decisions with midwives largely outside male authority. Speaking of midwives, these women held respected positions in medieval communities. Far from being the ignorant old women later portrayed by male physicians, medieval midwives possessed sophisticated empirical knowledge. They understood how to turn breech babies, manage complications, and use herbal remedies to ease pain. Their knowledge represented a female-controlled domain of expertise. Medieval canon law recognized women's right to consent to marriage, at least in theory. While family pressure certainly existed, a marriage could technically be annulled if either party had been forced to consent. Court records contain numerous cases where women successfully argued their marriages were invalid due to coercion, showing this wasn't just theoretical. Within marriage, women had recognized rights regarding sex. Medieval church teaching held that both spouses had equal claim to marital debt, the obligation to engage in sex. Women could legitimately refuse sex during menstruation, pregnancy, while mesting, or during religious observances, giving them culturally sanctioned periods of sexual autonomy. Women's testimony about their own bodies held legal weight in certain contexts. In cases of disputed pregnancy or questions about virginity, women's statements about their physical experiences were considered relevant evidence. When Marjorie Paston wrote to her husband in the 15th century about delaying their reunion because of her issue of blood, he respected this as her decision. Convents offered some women an alternative to marriage and childbearing altogether. By choosing religious life, women gained a socially acceptable way to avoid the dangers of repeated pregnancies in an era with high maternal mortality. Some parents specifically supported daughters entering convents to spare them these physical risks. For peasant and working women, mesting practices offered some reproductive control. Extended mesting, which suppresses ovulation, served as natural child spacing. Evidence suggests women in many communities nursed children for 2 to 3 years, limiting their fertility during that period. Number 4. Medieval women didn't participate in art, literature, or music. Ever seen a medieval painting and assumed no women were behind the brushstrokes? Think again. Women created, performed, and inspired art throughout the Middle Ages, though their contributions have often been overlooked or misattributed. In monasteries and convents, women produced stunning, illuminated manuscripts. Hildegard of Bingen created vibrant illustrations to accompany her visionary writings in the 12th century, and a 10th century Spanish nun proudly signed her work, En Pintrix et Deagetrix, and Painter and Helper of God. The Bayeux Tapestry, one of the most famous medieval artworks depicting the Norman conquest, was almost certainly embroidered by women, though their names weren't recorded. Medieval women composed remarkable music. Hildegard of Bingen wrote over 70 musical compositions, including the morality play Ordo Virtutum, one of the earliest known European musical dramas. Her music is still performed and recorded today. Childbearers, female troubadours in southern France, composed and performed lyric poetry set to music. The Comtesse de Diaz, a chantar mare, remains the only troubadour song with surviving musical notation. In literature, women made significant contributions despite limited access to formal education. Marie de France wrote 12 lays narrative poems in the late 12th century that remain central to medieval literary studies. Christine de Pizan produced poetry, biography, military manuals, and proto-feminist works in early 15th century France, supporting herself professionally through writing after becoming a widow. Women frequently appear as patrons of the arts, commissioning works and influencing artistic development. Eleanor of Aquitaine patronized troubadour poetry and championed the courtly love tradition. Blanche of Castile commissioned the stunning Sainte-Chapelle in Paris. Marie de Champagne sponsored Chrétien de Troyes, whose Arthurian romances transformed medieval literature. As performers, women participated in various traditions. Court records mention female minstrels, dancers, and acrobats traveling between towns and castles. In religious contexts, nuns performed liturgical drama and music within their communities. The 13th century play of Daniel from Beauvais Cathedral contains parts likely performed by women. Textile arts, often dismissed as craft rather than art, represented a major creative domain where women excelled. The embroidery technique known as opus Anglicanum, English work, became famous throughout Europe for its exceptional quality, and women were primary creators of these luxurious pieces. When King Henry III needed ceremonial garments in 1241, he specifically requested work by Rose, a female embroiderer known for her expertise. Archaeological evidence reveals women's artistic expression in everyday objects. Spindle, whorls, combs, and household items decorated with intricate designs show creativity expressed through daily tools. These vernacular art forms may lack the prestige of cathedral sculptures, but they represent the aesthetic sensibilities of ordinary medieval women. Number 3. Medieval women never traveled or had adventures. Think medieval women spent their entire lives within a mile of their birthplace. History tells a different story. Women traveled extensively throughout the Middle Ages for pilgrimages, trade, family obligations, and sometimes just for adventure. Pilgrimages offered socially acceptable opportunities for women to travel independently. Marjorie Kempe, a 15th century English mystic, journeyed to Jerusalem, Rome, Santiago de Compostela, and throughout Europe. Her travel memoir details the practical challenges she faced and the remarkable autonomy she exercised. Thousands of less famous women made shorter pilgrimages to local and regional shrines, sometimes traveling in women-only groups. Noble women regularly traveled between family estates, sometimes covering hundreds of miles. Eleanor of Aquitaine accompanied her first husband on the Second Crusade, journeying from France to Constantinople and Antioch. She later traveled extensively throughout her vast holdings in England and France. Queen Margaret of Scotland made repeated journeys between England and Scotland for diplomatic purposes. Even peasant women moved more than we might expect. Court records show women traveling to regional markets, visiting relatives in neighboring villages, or relocating for work opportunities. Young women often left home to work as servants in other households, sometimes traveling considerable distances for better positions. Women merchants participated in trade networks, particularly in textile industries. Flemish women traveled to sell fine linens at regional fairs. In the Mediterranean, women from trading families sometimes accompanied shipments or managed overseas business connections, particularly when male relatives were ill or deceased. Some women crossed cultural and religious boundaries through their travels. Female pilgrims to Jerusalem encountered Islamic societies. Christian women living in Spain navigated modal environments where Christian, Muslim, and Jewish communities coexisted. These experiences gave them broader worldviews than we might assume. Women's mobility sometimes resulted from necessity rather than choice. War and political instability forced many to flee their homes and rebuild elsewhere. After her husband was exiled from Florence, Monna Giovanna Senami established a new household and business connections in Lucca, demonstrating remarkable adaptability. Maritime records occasionally mention women travelers on merchant vessels. While rarely serving as sailors, women traveled as passengers, particularly in the Mediterranean. Court documents from 14th century Marseille mention women who had traveled to North Africa and the Eastern Mediterranean for family business or relocation. Religious women traveled to establish new communities or reform existing ones. When Marie of Oignies felt called to a more austere religious life, she left her husband with his consent and established a new beguinage. Catherine of Siena traveled throughout Italy and to Avignon, France, on diplomatic missions tied to church reform. Number 2. Medieval women had no influence on religion or spirituality. Ever been told women were silent in medieval churches? You've been seriously misled. Women shaped medieval spiritual life as mystics, theologians, patrons, and leaders throughout the Middle Ages. Female mystics gained extraordinary influence through their visionary experiences. Julian of Norwich, whose Revelations of Divine Love represents the first book in English known to have been written by a woman, developed sophisticated theological concepts that influenced medieval understanding of God's love. Her anchor cell attached to a church became a place where people of all social classes sought spiritual guidance. Hildegard of Bingen composed theological works, created an alternative language, composed music for religious services, and corresponded with popes and emperors about church reform. When local clergy tried to silence her community by placing them under interdict, she successfully fought back, demonstrating remarkable authority for a 12th century woman. Women founded religious orders and movements. Clare of Assisi founded the Franciscan movement with Francis and established the Poor Clares, writing their rule herself, the first monastic rule written by a woman to receive papal approval. Bridget of Sweden founded the Brigittine order with innovative features like parallel male and female communities under a female leader. As abbesses, women exercised significant spiritual leadership. Some abbesses heard confessions, administered communities that included both men and women, and wielded authority comparable to bishops. The abbess of Las Huelgas in Spain held the remarkable privilege of reading the Gospel during Mass, normally restricted to male clergy. Outside formal church structures, Begreens created an alternative spiritual path. These lay religious women lived in semi-monastic communities without permanent vows, combining devotional life with active service in medieval cities. Some, like Mechthild of Magdeburg, wrote influential mystical texts. Others ran hospitals, taught children, or cared for the dying. Noble women shaped religious institutions through patronage. Elizabeth of Hungary used her royal wealth to build hospitals and care for the poor personally, becoming a model of hands-on charity that influenced medieval welfare practices. Blanche of Castile commissioned illuminated manuscripts and funded monastic communities that preserved learning and provided education. Women's religious writing circulated widely. Catherine of Siena's letters addressing popes, queens, and political leaders demonstrate her remarkable spiritual authority during the turmoil of the Western Schism. Marguerite Parte's Mirror of Simple Souls presented such radical mystical theology that it led to her execution for heresy in 1310, yet copies continued to circulate anonymously for centuries. In everyday parish life, women served as donors, maintained altar linens and vestments, participated in religious confraternities, and organized local celebrations of saints' feasts. Churchwardens' accounts show women donating candlesticks, textiles, and money for church maintenance and beautification. In Jewish communities, women maintained domestic religious traditions, ensuring kosher food preparation and observance of Sabbath rituals. Their roles, preserving religious culture during periods of persecution, were essential to community survival. Number 1. Medieval women were powerless victims of a misogynistic society. Were medieval women just passive victims of overwhelming oppression? Absolutely not. While they certainly faced constraints and inequalities, medieval women consistently demonstrated agency, resilience, and the ability to work within and around social structures to achieve their goals. Court records overflow with evidence of women assertively defending their interests. Agnes Grantham of 15th century London took her neighbor to court for nuisance when his newly built chimney filled her home with smoke. She won the case and forced him to reconstruct it. Thousands of similar cases show ordinary women using legal systems to protect themselves and their livelihoods. Women developed creative strategies to circumvent limitations. When direct authority was restricted, they exercised influence through relationships, patronage networks, and behind-the-scenes negotiation. Catherine de' Medici, unable to rule France directly as a woman, effectively controlled French politics for decades through her sons, using her position as queen mother to wield tremendous influence. Women's collective economic power could be substantial. In Ghent's textile industry, female workers organized strikes over working conditions as early as the 13th century. In London, women hucksters, market sellers, formed informal networks to control pricing and resist regulations they considered unfair. Religious life offered avenues for female authority and intellectual development. When male clerics criticized Hildegard of Bingen's public preaching, unusual for a woman, she cleverly cited her divine visions as authorization, effectively trumping male ecclesiastical authority with direct divine mandate. Within marriage, women negotiated practical power arrangements that often differed from theoretical legal subordination. The Paston Letters reveal Margaret Paston effectively running family affairs during her husband's frequent absences, making decisions about property, legal matters, and even defense during political conflicts. Women developed specialized knowledge that gave them authority in specific domains. Midwives possessed expertise about reproduction that male physicians couldn't match. Female brewers controlled techniques for producing essential food items. This practical knowledge translated into social respect and community standing. During crises, women stepped into traditionally male roles. When noble husbands departed for crusades or wars, wives frequently took over estate, management, defense, and political negotiations. Countess Nicola de la Haye successfully defended Lincoln Castle against rebel forces in 1217, demonstrating both military and political acumen. Even women in seemingly powerless positions found ways to assert themselves. Court records document female servants negotiating better terms, changing employers, or challenging unfair treatment. Some refused undesirable marriages despite family pressure, either entering convents or accepting the social consequences of remaining single. Peasant women participated in tax rebellions and local protest movements, sometimes playing leading roles. During the 1381 Peasants' Revolt in England, women were documented among the rebels who marched on London demanding political and economic reforms. Are you reconsidering everything you thought you knew about women in the Middle Ages? How might understanding their actual lives change our perspective on history and women's roles throughout time?